Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Observed on June 5th every year, World Environment Day is the largest global environmental event led by the UN Environment Programme. This year's theme, Only One Earth, is the same as that of the 1972 Stockholm Conference, the first conference to bring environmental issues into the global spotlight. 50 years on, where are we now in halting climate change? What has China done to tackle the climate crisis? And how should countries better cooperate to protect and restore our planet? To find out more, I'm joined today by Professor Zhang Li, Director of the Green Inclusive Carbon Neutrality Center, Dr. Lin-Xiu Zhang, Director of the UN Environment Programme International Ecosystem Management Partnership, and Ma Jun, Director with the Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. So welcome to the show. I will start with Dr. Lin-Xiu Zhang. Tell us a bit of history about World Environment Day. What's it about, and why we have the same theme as that in back 50 years ago?
As we all know, that World Environment Day is the biggest international day for the environment and led by UNEP, as you said, but it has been held in annual meetings since '73. And we believe that World Environment Day has helped to raise the awareness and generate political momentum around growing concerns such as depletion of the ozone layers and toxic chemicals, desertification, global warming, or ecosystem restoration, which was last year's theme. And the day, we believe that has gone to the largest global platform for environment outreach, and we know that millions of people from across the world engage to protect the planet. Of course, the road is still ahead of us to go. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Professor Zhang Li, what's your understanding of this global Environment Day and why we are marking it?
I think as we know that Global Environment Day is a really important event, and people can celebrate the human beings' contribution to protect our global environment. And it's also an important day that we can review the progress of global environment protection and conservation in the past years, so that we can secure our blue planet can be sustainable, and our human being social economy can be sustainable as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ma Jun, only one Earth, that's the theme of this Global Environment Day as the 1972, the first conference. It's the same theme. So over the past 50 years, tell us about the involvement. Where are we? How much progress have we made? And what kind of challenge we are facing now?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's really a historic moment that we are now trying to celebrate. We're going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first Stockholm Conference on Human Environment. It's really remarkable. At 50 years ago, a whole group of 130 countries can get together in Stockholm, in Sweden, to try to reveal the environment situation. At that time, some of the environment pollution problem has already become very serious in the industrialized countries, in America, in Europe, and in Japan. There are all cases of toxic chemicals really hurt people, public health. And in the meantime, there's the environment problem only just started emerging in some of the developing world at that time. China participated in the first Stockholm Conference, and that became the starting point for our country to recognize this issue and started working on environmental, building our environmental management system. And globally, it's the same. Today, we're still facing big challenges. In some of the in China and other developing countries, air, water, and soil pollution still pose threat. And globally, we're facing challenges on climate change and losses of biodiversity, deforestation, and the pollution of marine environment and the plastic emission. Things like this, we all still need to work together to tackle them.
Mm-hmm. As Marjorie mentioned about the crisis we are facing, this year's Stockholm +50 will address the triple planetary crisis of climate change, nature and biodiversity loss, and pollution and waste. So how are these three issues interrelated with each other? Are they getting more complicated for us to deal with?
Yeah, I think you're right in saying it's becoming more serious and complicated because we always say that nature is in an emergency mode and we have little time left. So for example, in order to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius this century, we must ensure that annual greenhouse gas emissions are cut in half by 2030. And also, if we don't act, the proportion of people exposed to air pollution above safe limits will increase by 50 in the next 10 years. And then the amount of plastic waste flowing into aquatic ecosystem will be nearly doubled by 2040. So there have been many important resolutions, for example, nature-based solution, decades of ecosystem restoration, and even in the last year, ending plastic pollution to tackle the triple planetary crisis. But however, a resolution will remain, but a global plea, unless we follow up with resources and actions to deliver. And there are encouraging signs, but there remain significant funding gaps, so which, if not met, will impact the implementation of our goal. So the way out of this dilemma is to transform our economies and societies to make them inclusive and fair and more connected with nature. We know that recognize the interconnectivity of all the SDGs and the intertwined environmental crisis. We must embrace nexus approaches, collective and transformative actions, which has been the core of this year's Stockholm +50. But of course, innovation, science, and technology are also very fundamental in this process. So we know that time is really running out these days.
Mm-hmm. Professor Zhang Li, as Dr. Xiu Zhang mentioned, it's a global effort, but also it's individual nations to make their own effort and policy changes. For example, let's focus a little bit on China. As a former host of World Environment Day on air pollution in 2019, China is focusing on building a clean and beautiful world this year. So tell us about China. What actions has China taken, for example, in recent years to better protect the environment, deal with these pollutions?
Okay, as we know that China did make a big progress in measures to tackle the air pollution in the past 10 years. And for the water pollution, Marjorie knows much better than me that with the IPE's waste map, we call it Weilan map. I don't know what the English name is, but that map show the changes of the air quality and the water quality, as well as other environmental quality around us. So that as a local people, if you open the Weilan map, we can learn the changes of the quality of our environment quickly. So it's a really big progress. And I still remember 10 years when IPE started to address this pollution information publicity issue. Some local government not very satisfied, but now Ministry of Ecology and Environment request all government open their environmental information to the public. And for civil society and NGOs, it's a really good opportunity for us to involve in monitoring the quality of our living environment every day. So this is a really big changes. Meanwhile, as we know that biodiversity conservation in the past 40 years, China also make big progress. As we know that we host the Kunming CBD COP15 meeting last October, and we are still, China government still leading the negotiation to draw agreement for the post-2020 biodiversity global targets. So it is a really encouraging news, but certainly, as we said, that it is not only China's responsibility to address this global crisis. So we did make some progress, but we need to gain all the effort together from other continents. So it's a global issue.
Well, Marjun, as Professor Zhang mentioned, your institute has been in the field for a long time and playing a very prominent role in raising this awareness. I think one important change is really about this consciousness awareness, from the public, from the government. People reach this consensus, there's a need for us to work together to improve the environment, to protect the environment, to fight the pollution, water, air, etc., because it's related to everybody.
Exactly. As Dr. Zhang put it, it's extremely important with this rising awareness in China. Back, say, more than 10 years ago, many would think that China was poor and let's develop before we think about environment. But that has been totally changed over the past 10 years. And we're very happy to see, working side by side with Dr. Zhang's organization, and we advocate for the transparency on air, water, and monitoring data. And corporate monitoring data. And during the process, we have seen, when people gain access to the information on, the real-time disclosure on air and water quality data, they will be mobilized to join the government efforts to promote the corporations to really assume their environmental responsibility, and also, some of them participated in this directly in monitoring and reporting the local the pollution of the local factories. And through this process, we have seen a vast improvement of China's air quality. In the year 2013, when we started monitoring air quality, at that time, the PM 2.5 concentration was nearly 90 micrograms in Beijing, and the WHO standards, of course, at that time was 10. Now it's 5. And through all these years of efforts, we have seen this number dropping to 33 last year. And not just in Beijing, but in most of the major regions. That's a huge, played a huge beneficial role to the improvement of public health, to reduce the risks. On the water side, still remember when we got funded in 2006, that year, the water quality, water pollution was really serious. 28% of the monitored sections were good for no use, the water. And last year, that number had dropped that ratio had dropped to about 1%. So that significant progress have been made, and hundreds of millions have been benefited, not just in China. Globally, it's also very, very helpful because the vast expansion of coal consumption has been put under control through China's Clean Air Action Plan. And this is a major contribution to the global fight against climate change.
Well, Majun, China's first specialized law on wetland protection took effect this year on June the 1st, which clarifies the division of management. So tell us more about that. What kind of a role it is supposed to play in protecting the wetland?
Yeah, this law is also extremely important because wetland is dubbed as the kidney of our planet, of the environment. It can help host the biodiversity. It can also help to decompose some of the pollutions that we discharge into the water bodies. And so wetland, but in the meantime, it's extremely vulnerable because in many regions in China, we are in shortage of water resources. So they tend to be over tapped, the resource. And then it's also, we're also in shortage of the arable land. So sometimes people drain the wetland to gain access to arable land. So with all the progress made in China on biodiversity protection, preservation, we still have major gaps on the protection of our wetland, which continue to dwindle, continue to suffer from all these impacts. So it's very important to have this new legislation, just as we have made legislation on the overall, environment protection, and also on air, water, and soil pollution, on the ocean, marine environment. All this we have made laws and regulations, and now finally we're going to have this specialized law on wetland. It's very important.
Mm-hmm. Professor Zhang Li, for China, obviously this is, legislative effort is critical in protecting the environment, the wetland in this case. China also made the goals, in 2030, 2060, peaking carbon emission and achieving carbon neutrality, 30 years in space. So, where are we now? So is China on the on schedule to achieve those progresses as planned?
As we know that our President Xi announced that China is trying to reach the carbon emission peak in the year 2030 and try to make the carbon neutrality by 2060. So this is our national strategy to tackle the climate change, and certainly it needs overall social economy reform. As we know that climate change has become a serious challenge for all mankind, not only China, and over the years, the international community has been tried to reach consensus on the commitment and action to address climate change, China as well. As we know, at the COP26 last year, UNFCCC, the parties bridged their differences and broadened consensus and agreed on the implementation rules of Paris Agreement, including some important document, which is grateful. However, we also saw the conference did not respond well to some of the core concerns from developing countries. It seems that, to address climate change has not yet succeeded. And we still need to continue to work hard and turn from commitment to action. In China, as we see that our energy consumption, the source of most of energy sources are still rely on fossil fuel resources, and the new energy resources is not really so promising yet. So we still have room to make changes to address the climate crisis issue. And as we know, China's response to climate change is not an easy task. So with China's rapid social economic development in the past 40 years, carbon emission from the reduction side have remained high, and carbon emission from the consumption side, especially from resident household life, are also increasing year by year. So China carbon neutral framework roadmap study. It's a report reported by Chinese Academy of Sciences, point out that China industrial production processes and the citizens' household consumption have counted for about 53% of total carbon emission. Therefore, I think the carbon reduction for the consumption side is facing a serious challenge too. So we need to do more to address the challenge, I think.
Mm-hmm. We'll shift to another issue. Dr. Lin Xiuzhang, the WHO warned recently that the tobacco damages both the environment and human health. And I think people are familiar with that damages to individual health if you use a lot of tobacco. But other, damages, for example, like 600 million trees every year, 200,000 hectares of land, 22 billion tons of water, and 84 million tons of CO2. That's surprising. Tell us more about that.
I'm not sure I'm the best person who respond to this question, but my understanding is that this is a long-standing issue that we are facing. On the one hand, we need to make sure that at least the developing countries have productions that to generate a foreign currency. On the other hand, we know that it's inducing a lot of issues related to CO2 emission, and this is really a production style, but also health concerns. I think the reason WHO, I think this is a complicated issue. The key is that how we find alternatives, because I visited a country, a very poor country in Africa, who are mainly producing tobacco. I know their tobacco production is very high. Most of those are for export because they need to have foreign currency. But on the other hand, people are really dying of hunger. Their life expectancy was very low. So in this sense, where are the solutions? I think it's a cope with type of issue where from the supply side, we probably need to think about improve the production or for sustainable production or somehow. On the consumption side, I think for an individual, if I wanted to encourage people to change their lifestyles, to cut off the tobacco, smoking, because those are I think the private cost would be you buying the tobacco and your health issue, but the public cost is much, much higher, public health concern. So, but the solution really is not that simple, but we need to start addressing the livelihood issue first. And then at the same time, from supply side, from demand side, we also needed to think about behavioral changes. I think I'm not sure that I responded to this question correctly, but I think at the same time, we need to take into externalities when we talk about income generation, but at the same time, the environmental damage and also health damage should be taken into consideration as a whole kind of systematic view on the true costing and true valuation of the process.
I think you made a good point because it reminds me of climate change. It's like for developing countries, on one hand, you need to continue to grow our economy. At the same time, it's very difficult for you to reduce the reliance on this fossil fuel. It's like tobacco, mostly growing in low-income, middle-income countries. You have to find an alternative. It's a challenging job. And then if you look around the world, but anyway, we are facing this threat from the climate change. My dream, people would notice that not only the government, not only the individual, probably the global efforts, but also the NGOs. NGOs just like your institute, they are playing an important role. Share with us, I know like your institute provides this analysis, provides these numbers, widely quoted by including the government, including the global institutions, based on your analysis.
Yeah, I appreciate your attention to the NGOs' role in the all this fighting against pollution and also on the protection of the biodiversity and nature conservancy, and also increasingly on fighting climate change. NGO participation is part of the public participation. We all increasingly understand that the challenge of dealing with our national, local environmental problem, and especially the challenge on the global scale. They're so big and so complex and in such a big magnitude. It cannot be overcome without extensive participation from all stakeholders. So the public can play a very, very important role, can provide the what I call the fundamental driving force. But the public sometimes, when it comes to environment, there are this technical threshold. It's very hard to organize and mobilize. So the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, can play the role, to help, overcome these gaps. And in China particularly, because we're just in the process of modernization. So how to enhance transparency, how to enhance public participation, how to ensure that all the stakeholders can bridge the gap of distrust and come together. I think NGOs can also function like that. Gradually we can see that in China at the beginning, there are, when we just started launching our Blue Map database, when we started documenting all the violations of so many companies, at this moment, more than 1 million factories kind of documented with their violations in our database. At the beginning, you can imagine, not just the factories unhappy, but the local government, they have suspicions as well. But increasingly, they understand that the goal is not to undermine any growth or any development, but to help level the playing field and to ensure that we have a fair and just enforcement. And it's very hard to imagine, more than 10 years ago, at that time, we were in pretty difficult situation. And now some of hundreds of major NGOs across China are quite active, working on all kinds of issues and building better relationship with local government.
Well, with that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.